Morning. Wow.
So we have a great panel today, and I thought I'd just kick things off by setting some context. So both of you have done so much work in this space so far, and I was just wondering if you can give us a sense of like how much interest and urgency is there outside of this room of responsible citizens.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when I was approached by the EPA administrator, Gina McCarthy, to talk about this issue of food waste at the Department of Agriculture. And at the time, we had roughly 1,000 entities, nonprofit organizations, companies interested in this issue. When I left just a year or two later, we had over 4,000. So it's obviously something that people understand the economic aspect of it, they understand the environmental aspect of it. I think the thing that we're continuing to struggle with even today is how we take that avoided food waste and direct it in a way that helps people who need it most. And I think the logistics of this, a lot has been done in that space, but there's still more to be done. I'll just give you a dairy example. Food banks, and I'm on the board of Feeding America, I know that at food banks, there's a tremendous need for milk, dairy products. The average person participating in a food bank today receives about a gallon a year of milk, a gallon a year. They need 63 gallons. So there's a tremendous amount of milk that is literally dumped on the farm because food prices are low and it just doesn't make economic sense. So there is the logistic issue of how do we get that milk that the farmer has produced, he would love or she would love to get it to a food bank. How do we do that?
Who seems interested in handling that part of?
Well, there's an interesting group at Prairie Farms. This is a co-op in the Midwest, upper Midwest, and they have figured out, working with a nonprofit organization, a foundation, how they can make it work so that their unused milk or milk that they just can't sell gets to a food bank. And I think there's a model there for the rest of the country to follow in trying to get that component of food, nutritious component of food, into food insecure families.
Mm-hmm. Does that mean, in a sense, that like redistributing that lost milk depends on donations made to foundations and nonprofits?
Well, the economic case is that there is a cost associated with it, and the question is who bears that cost. Obviously, the farmer's basically bearing the cost of producing the milk. The question is, and the food bank is not in a position, they don't have resources, so somebody has to act to provide the resource.
But I'm assuming that's government.
Well, it could be government.
Well, someone has to pay the farmer. The farmer's not going to just donate it.
The farmer could donate it, but then again, you've got tax issues in terms of whether or not they get the full value of it. But even if the farmer donates it, you still have the logistic cost of transporting it.
Right.
So government could have a responsibility. How confident are you in that federal government doing that, Tom?
Not very. Right now?
Yeah, right now.
Not very.
Yeah, okay.
I have a better chance of winning an Emmy on Sunday, but that's another story.
Well, we're rooting for you. We're rooting for you. But your comment about the involvement, you've seen a lot of this.
Yeah, I still think that as much as we think we're getting the word out there, I still think the average person on the street doesn't understand this issue. And and this is, I guess, the role that I figured I can play is there's a lot of people in this room that are doing some really wonderful things. I'm not one of them, but I have a platform. So when I get out there and talk about these issues, I can reach more people, and I understand my position, my role, and I'm very comfortable going up on the Hill and trying to talk about these issues as well. But I really think that we still need to do a better job of getting this information out there to the average person. I talk to friends that I think are fairly enlightened, and they have no idea. And so I think the more that we get this out there, the more you're going to find people who have solutions as well. So I don't think we're there yet in terms of getting the message out there to as many people as possible.
I spoke last week at Colorado State University and Grinnell College, and the gist of my talk was encouraging the students, the young people of this country, to do what young people have done in the past. If you think about the civil rights movement, if you think about ending unpopular wars, young people were basically the motivators. They were the people that sort of organized, they educated themselves, they advocated, and they made a difference. And I think it's fair to say in this country that many of us are concerned about the divisions that occur in this country, the fact that we don't get things done on big issues like food waste. And so I encourage these kids to think about the opportunity for young people to figure out how to rediscover a way to consensus. And I suggested that an area where you could potentially bring right and left together is around food. And one of the issues that I mentioned was this issue of food waste. Because this is something young people can have an impact with. So on Colorado State, I said, do you still use trays? I don't know about you, but I have a tray, I fill it up, right? And then I realize, I can't eat it all. But if I have to carry a plate, not only do I not fill the plate up, but I feel very hesitant about going back for seconds, right? Because it's a little embarrassing. So you end up actually eating what you need as opposed to eating more than you need. And just eliminating trays, for example, is something a number of universities and colleges are now doing, which has allowed them to reduce food waste.
Yeah.
That's a remarkably simple solution.
I would love to see the buffet in hotels just go the way of the dinosaur. It is the most wasteful thing in the world. I fought with a hotel group in Florida that I'm involved with. I just didn't want to do it, and they just refused to listen. And I just think it's just so wasteful. I know the amount of food that gets thrown in the garbage.
What does it look like at the end of a day at a buffet?
It's everything you see on the buffet that's out is going to go in the garbage, because number one, you can't, if it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and you have a brunch buffet, you can't let that sort of dwindle down because it looks terrible. So you have to constantly keep it filled, and it all gets wasted. And so that's something I think hotels are starting to actually talk about this issue and move away from it. And I think the consumer's got to start demanding it as well. And this is why I think the consumer still needs to be educated. There's so many things that we can do on an individual basis, at home. When it comes to shopping solutions, as a chef in a restaurant, we're taught not to waste food. We waste food, our food costs go up, we lose money. And so following things like FIFO, first in, first out, when you go shopping, pull everything out of your refrigerator, put the new stuff in, take the old stuff out, constantly monitoring what's in the refrigerator, shopping more frequently, buying fewer items when you're shopping. I think these are all really good strategies, but I think that these are strategies that can happen at home, and this just happens through education. So there's great technologies out there that can help with food waste, from small at-home compost machines to large technologies. You'll hear Justin Kaming talk a little later on, who's got an amazing technology solution to food waste. And so there's a lot of grinders that grind food up where the particles are small enough where they can be dumped into the ocean. So there are technologies out there, but I still think on an individual basis, if the average consumer understands that they're throwing away $1,500 a year in the garbage. When I was at MSNBC, we aired a film called Just Eat It, and they had this great graphic where this woman was walking out of the store with 4 bags, and she just dropped one and kept walking. And that's essentially what we're doing. And so I still think that there's big solutions to this problem. There's also small individual solutions to this problem. But I also think that, going back to federal government, this is one issue at Food Policy Action, this organization I co-founded. This is one issue where the Republicans reached out to us, and we're considered a liberal group. They reached out to us and said, help us with this, because we're trying to figure this out, because we think this is an issue where we can get together.
Now, here's an interesting aspect of this. I was at a meeting yesterday down in North Carolina in Inmar, and they have done analytics on online shopping in terms of groceries. And it turns out that when you shop online, you end up buying 29% more than when you go to the store.
Wow.
So that's an issue that we're going to have to start.
Right.
We're going to have to start thinking about in terms of making that consumer fully appreciative of exactly what they need, when they need it, and not more. And the other issue is this issue of buy-sell dates and making sure that people actually understand what that means. When I lived in Washington, D.C., we have a home in Iowa, and we live right near one of our kids, and he was very protective of his parents, and he went in one day, and he literally threw out everything in the refrigerator because one or two things had a few green spots on it. But then he threw out everything in their freezer because he assumed that it had been in there for months. Well, actually, I had just gone to Whole Foods, and I had a couple of steaks in there, so it was pretty expensive toss.
Yeah.
So, understanding and appreciating how long things can stay appropriately and safely.
And that's also the role of the federal government. I know Shelley Pingree has a bill that's working its way through Congress, and I think she has bipartisan support for that. I think Richard Blumenthal on the Senate side is supporting it as well. So, hopefully we can get those sell-by dates where they're more accurate. What is that process? To me, my understanding of that process, it's a consumer focus group that they get together and they just talk about it and say, well, what should this date be? And they just, throw something on the wall and that's it.
That's it, and it goes not any correlation to safety.
No science at all, right?
Yeah,
Safe, right,
yeah.
right.
It needs to be developed by science, and then people need to understand what it actually means, and it needs to be consistent, because some products are used by, some sell by. What is the difference, if there is a difference?
Secretary, can you tell us a little bit more about your work at USDA on reducing food waste and how far along you guys got on your 2030 goal?
Well, first of all, was to establish the goal with the EPA and to basically expand the network of people that were interested in this issue, and I think we had fairly good success there. We tried to model it at USDA. We have a lot of labs that do a lot of work on livestock and so forth, and there's a lot of waste product that's produced from that research. And the question is, how had we dealt with it in the past? And unfortunately, some of it had been landfilled, which obviously creates some methane issues. And so we created composting efforts. We created strategies within our labs to reduce waste. We began the process within our cafeteria to try to establish a greater sensitivity. And frankly, we got our employees to basically understand that this was an issue. And so now I know when I go to a restaurant, if I don't want the bread and butter, I'll tell the waiter, don't bring the bread and butter. I mean, invariably they'll come and they'll put something on the table and then you don't use it or you kind of look at it. I don't know what happens to that bread,
right.
But what happens to that bread?
Yeah, what happens to that bread, chef? You turn it into something else?
Often that's like the number one thing restaurants actually donate to food banks,
Okay.
to City Hall, things like that. They have so much bread. But no, there's good solutions like the Orca solution. But there's also, typically that's used for family meal. So in a restaurant where we're prepping things, that go into the dishes, we'll prep them for the night, and then after that we're discarding it. But we collect it and it goes into family. It's perfectly good food.
Right.
It just may not meet the standards of, our restaurant, and so that can go into family meal the next day. So we do use it. We have strategies to use that.
And sometimes, my wife and I, Christine and I go out to dinner, and I, obviously I'm much bigger than she is, and so she'll say, I only want half a portion. I mean, I'll pay for the full portion, but I only want half. Mm-hmm. And I think as consumers, we have some responsibility when we go into a restaurant of providing more direction, if you will, in terms of what our portion size needs to be. And then hopefully the restaurant will be able to adjust and not create too much of confusion.
Right.
That is an interesting question. Like how much of this can we blame on the consumer?
Well, see, I go back to education. I think if we started teaching home ec in school again, my wife likes to joke around that I'm a Depression era housewife. The way I take care of my food, that's a compliment actually. I have a garden, so I have a lot of food that comes in at a certain, especially in the summer. It pains me to throw it out. So right now I have a freezer full of tomatoes that eventually I'll get around to making sauce out of and jar it, and I'll have my jarred sauce for the year. Pickling things and things like that. So I think, I think we're 2 generations removed from really understanding the importance of food. My grandparents who lived through a depression would not throw food out. I mean, my grandfather would fry bacon in the morning and save the grease and put it in a jar and use it to cook with. They understood the value of food, and somewhere along the lines, and especially like in the 50s, with fast food and the rise of fast food, we completely devalued what the real cost of food is. And because the end cost of food is very little compared to other countries, but it's the real cost of food that we're not understanding. It's the energy that goes into it. It's seed, it's fertilizer, it's pesticides, it's water. So what is the real value of that? We've lost that. When you can go and get a burger for 69 cents, you don't really think about throwing half of that in the garbage. Mm-hmm. We don't value food.
Right.
This issue of water is a really important issue. I do some work out in Colorado, and right now, literally, that is a state that may have to decide whether to continue to have their agriculture industry or continue to have cities that expand, because their water needs will not, based on current levels, will not accommodate both. So people have got to get serious about this issue of water, and it's the same thing as food. We don't appreciate water. It's relatively inexpensive, and of course we waste a tremendous amount of it as well. So Tom's absolutely right. We don't have an appreciation for food. We don't respect it, I guess, in a sense. We don't respect the effort that goes into it, because it is an extraordinary effort if you really think about it, how it gets from farm to fork. And if we waste a third of it, that is a tremendous, you talk about chemicals, pesticides, water, seed, labor, it's an enormous loss. And then yet we have 23 million folks who don't have access to a decent grocery store. We have 42 million folks who live in food insecure homes. In this country, we have 830 some million who are food insecure globally. And it's not just a US problem, it's a global problem.
In that situation in Colorado, what's the likely outcome between urban development or or having the agriculture sector suffer?
Well, they've been able to define the need for 1 million acres feet of water. That's about 325 billion gallons that they have to figure out how to reuse, recycle, reclaim. And so they have a goal, and they have allocated that goal among agriculture, making it more efficient and more precise, among industry and among cities developing buildings and so forth that help to reclaim the water. So the question is whether or not they will be willing to finance the improvements. So it's an awareness, and it's the willingness to put resources behind it to build the infrastructure that will allow us to do a better job of preserving and conserving water. The same thing is true with food. It's again, if we respect food, then we will figure out the logistics and the cost of those logistics and figure out public policy that will support people that want to donate, people that want to be in this business, be able to provide the support that gets it from where it's wasted potentially to where it's would be consumed and used.
Do you think one of the challenges with the issue of food waste is that it's like not that sexy? It's like really not that sexy.
Well,
I mean, we're talking about garbage essentially, right?
It's not, but here's the, I mean, there are
No,
many
no,
huge
no.
problems in the
It's
country.
sexy.
No,
Oh, no,
well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No. I want to push back on it's garbage. We got to collect it before it becomes garbage. We actually have to sort of get used to the idea of eating things that maybe don't look perfect. We have to make sure that again, the strategies that we're not over purchasing. We have to collect it before it turns into garbage. After it's garbage, there's other strategies. But I think that's exactly the mindset. And then the other thing that we have to be careful of, and you mentioned food insecurity. When most people hear food waste, they're thinking plate waste. We can't feed people who are hungry plate waste. And so we need to educate the population on this, because when they hear food waste, no one's thinking of how much is left behind in the fields. No one's thinking about what happens at the distribution point where things just get left off. No one's thinking about when you go to the farmer's market, those few things that are wilted. No one's going to purchase them, and they're going to end up in the garbage. And so, no, we have to move away from this word of waste.
Well, it may not be sexy, but think about the connections with this issue. All right, first of all, there's the environmental issue. When it does become garbage, goes into a landfill, produces methane, that's an issue that everybody's concerned about. We're concerned about income inequality. We're concerned about low-income families saving $1,500 a year. That's a big deal for most families in this country today. Then there's the issue of immigration. You say, well, how is immigration tied to this? Well, Tom just pointed out there is food that is not being harvested. And the reason it's not being harvested is because we don't have enough people to harvest it. The reason we don't have enough people to harvest it is because we have a broken immigration system that currently people refuse to fix. So the question is, can we use this issue of food waste to educate people about these other issues, right? And this is an issue, frankly, that brings right and left together, right? It doesn't divide us, it brings us together. Maybe with that issue, we rediscover the route to getting to consensus, and maybe that then allows us to do a better job on the environment, or a better job on immigration, or a better job on income inequality. See, it's a big deal.
Sure.
See, I think finding a way to create the infrastructure to collect those orphan fruits and vegetables that are getting left behind, process them, minimal process them, freeze them, and get them to the school lunch program. So you're paying the farmer. So instead of leaving the stuff in the field, you're actually paying the farmer maybe a little less for those blemished vegetables. You're paying someone to process it, and then it gets to the school lunch program. So you're creating jobs. The farmer gets a benefit, and you have fresher food in school lunch programs.
And the farmer's not going to balk at the fact that he's going to get paid less, because we have grades that are assigned, and he or she understands, depending upon the grade, that dictates the price. So this creates sort of a bottom level pricing for those fruits and vegetables that may not look right, but are perfectly safe to consume.
So Chef, you actually had just mentioned freezing, which is one of these old technologies that seems to just take care of a lot of things that are perishable. but has recently fallen out of favor with consumers. Can you talk a little bit about that? Seems like maybe consumer trends aren't always working in favor of
Yeah, and I'm not sure why.
solving this
I
problem.
use my freezer at home. In the restaurants, we don't. And I think that's the problem, is that, this whole chef movement that's happened over the last 15 years, and we're talking fresh. That's really great for our restaurants. It's not a great strategy for home. And so I have a bunch of kale that I just picked. I can't possibly eat it in one night or 2 nights. So I blanch it, season it, put it in the freezer. And all winter long I have it. And it doesn't hurt the kale. It's leafy greens, it's fine. I'm not going to turn it into a salad, but I can use it for soups and stews and things like that. So again, finding strategies where at home where you're seeing something that's starting to go bad. Tomatoes, for instance. You go to the farmer's market, you buy too many because they look so great this time of year. You bring them home, you put them on your counter, and they start to, fruit flies start coming around. Okay, so eventually you throw them out.
Have you been to my house?
And so freeze them, just put them in the freezer, and then turn them into sauce. So if you can't get to it today, when you have that cold, rainy day or snowy day when you have nothing to do at home, then make sauce out of it. So, but use a freezer. The freezer's fine.
How long can a frozen sauce last?
No, the sauce I jar, but frozen sauce, it lasts a long time. There's nothing to really go bad.
So
It's frozen.
one of my husband's favorite stories to tell is his dad made spaghetti one day and said during dinner, "What was the favorite thing, your favorite memory from 1999?" And he was like, "I don't know, I was too young." He's like, "Mine was making this spaghetti sauce." So I'm sure you wouldn't recommend this, but they lived to tell the joke.
It was still in the freezer.
It was still, and it fed them that night. So,
Awesome.
Well, there's a food.
And they're still alive.
Yeah,
they're still
They
alive.
didn't go to
They're
the hospital.
functioning people.
Okay.
Yeah. This is obviously not a recommended practice.
Well, there's a Food Keeper app that you can go online, get the Food Keeper app, and it'll tell you how long makes sense for you to freeze something or to keep something in a freezer, or how long it's okay to keep it in a refrigerator.
Right.
It's just real simple.
Another great home technology. Is Sam Cassidy in the room? I know he's speaking later on. I know he's involved with an organization or a company where there's cameras in the refrigerator, and they scan the refrigerator, and you can actually punch in what you have in the refrigerator, and they'll give you recipes, sort of how to use what's in your refrigerator. So there's cool technologies out there. But again, I don't know what the price point of that's going to be, and I don't know if sort of everyone can afford that. But it's still, there are strategies out there. So maybe 10 years from now, it'll be less expensive, and it'll be the sort of norm in the refrigerator. But
So I also was wondering, it seems to me at this point that a lot of the movement is very grassroots, driven by advocacy. Is there another market for this? Is there a business or a business model that can help, solve the problem of food waste?
yes, there are big business solutions out there. Mind-boggling how big of an issue this is, and the money that could be made.
Well,
So yes, there are business solutions to this.
aren't there restaurants now that are focused on basically positioning themselves as taking ugly food and producing great meals?
Well, yeah, there are, but I think a lot of that, Dan Barber's done a great job with his campaign. I just don't know if there's a business model there in the restaurant. And again, restaurants we're trained not to waste food. Yeah. But I think there are bigger solutions out there that I've seen in turning food waste into fertilizer or feed or things like that. And I think that's where there's money to be made.
I was talking to a guy yesterday who's working on a technology. You mentioned kale. Taking basically leafy greens, extracting the water from those greens, and then sort of pulverizing the solids into a powder that has nutritional value, and then using the powder to supplement foods, potentially in food banks. Another friend of mine's working with, I think, Giant out in California, to essentially take those vegetables, extract the water, and use the water to in a hydroponic operation, and use the solids in a digester to produce energy for the grocery store. So I think there are clearly business models, and it's just a matter of people being creative and innovative about it. So I don't think there's a lack of ideas.
If we do solve the problem of food waste, does that mean that eventually we produce less food? So
Well,
much of our land and resources is dedicated to growing and producing food.
Here's the challenge. 9 billion people by the year 2050, you're going to have to increase food production by 50%. Now, eliminating food waste clearly would be a critical component of this, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to still figure out how to produce more and consume it in different ways.
In an environment that's becoming hostile to growing.
Increasingly difficult, much more difficult. We're going to have more intense storms. We're going to have pests that will last longer. We're going to have droughts that will last longer. We've got these forest fires that are climate related in part. So it's a real challenge. I've been told, I don't know if this is accurate, but I've been told that the amount of technology and innovation that would be required to increase that food production to the level that will feed 9 billion is about as much as we've had in the previous 10,000 years in agriculture. So there, and then we want to do it in a sustainable way. We want to do it in a way that renourishes and replenishes the soil. These are fairly significant challenges, and doing it in a way that continues to make farming for most profitable. I mean, here's the unknown secret about farming. There are in America today about 2 million farmers. About half of those are folks who have something going on in the backyard, take it down to the farmer's market, great. But when you think of a family farm, you're not thinking of those people, you're thinking of somebody who's got a couple hundred acres. In the best year we had in farm income, best year, 2014, best year, 700,000 of the remaining million netted $10,000 out of their farming operation in the best year. Now that's not going to be netted this year. Now there were some families that did very, very well because they had very large commercial sized operations, but the reality is for most farmers today, it is a hand-to-mouth kind of existence. And so as we look at ways to increase productivity, as we look at new technologies, one of the concerns I have is a lot of the technology is being developed because of privately funded research. We've sort of moved away from public financed research. Just not too many years ago, it was a 50-50 proposition. Today, it's about a third public, 2/3 private. Private obviously expects profit from the research, and that makes that technology more expensive, makes it less likely to get in the hands of everybody.
Right.
So maybe we need to have also a discussion in this country about restoring publicly financed research that's available to everybody, to all the innovators and creators out there.
Do you see the USDA shifting some of R&D over to commodity, away from commodity crops into specialty crops, so we can figure out how to produce more and less acres, which is what we've done for commodity crops and a really great job doing that. So
it's doing it. It's doing that. And for example, we had a $100 million research initiative focused on organic that was never before. So it is doing that. It's also providing additional risk management tools for the specialty crop producers so that it's more likely that they get in the business or stay in the business. And there's also, I think, a move, it's very, very small at this point, but I think it's growing, of diversifying the crop rotations that we see on farms in order to replenish the soil. We have basically a 2 or 3 crop rotation system in the country today. We probably need a 3 to 5 crop rotation system. And I think you're going to see more and more farms diversify, and that will lend itself to companies doing a better job and public universities doing a better job of researching this issue.
Could you see in the next farm bill where they're actually increasing crop insurance to specialty crops? I mean, I don't. It seems like they're trying to cut crop insurance.
Well, what we did is we expanded the availability of crop insurance to quite a few more crops.
Right,
okay,
right.
I think that's going to continue.
Okay.
The problem. This is a whole other issue.
Yeah.
The problem with the farm bill is we always start the discussion in Washington D.C. with how much money we can cut.
The problem with the farm bill is
what we should be doing is defining the need,
yeah.
and then basically saying how can we be creative in leveraging the federal resources to meet that need. We did this a little bit in conservation, and we saw significant leverage. I think we need to do more of that kind of concept. Whether they'll do that, I don't know.
How do you think the issue of food waste stands in the current administration, if at all?
In fairness to the USDA and Secretary Perdue, he doesn't have any of his key staff people in place. He doesn't have his deputy, he doesn't have his undersecretaries. So in fairness, he's really just kind of drinking out of a fire hose now. I don't know where that issue is in the priority listing. I mean, obviously, I hope it's as prevalent as it was in the previous administration. But even if it's not, there's still an opportunity at the state and local level probably to have an even more profound impact on the issue than at the federal level, and that potentially could drive a larger federal presence. So my advice to folks is don't always focus on the federal government. You've got a local and state government that have resources and capacity. Use it.
We were joking around the fact that the EPA should be turned into the IEPA, Industrial Environmental Protection Agency, because that seems to be the only thing they're looking to protect is industry.
there's probably an executive order in the works. So, Chef, I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about, the current interest in cooking. We have this generation of food-crazed millennials, all kind of like self-acclaimed foodies who don't know how to cook. And there are, food analysts who say that, the number of households who are going to be cooking on a regular basis is just steadily declining. So, I can't imagine that's good.
So I guess we need more restaurants?
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
I don't know. I think more people are interested in food. The problem is always time. Who has time to cook? And that's why you see some of these replacement meal, like the Blue Apron to the world, actually. It looks like more people are cooking, but they're not prepping, so they're saving some time. That's a waste stream I'd love to look at. What is the waste stream of a Blue Apron? I mean, they're producing so much food. Often we're focused on their packaging waste, but where's the waste on the other end? Now
they're
saving waste to consumers. Well, they're saving waste for the consumers because everything's measured and you're using everything. So there's less consumer waste. But on the back end of these companies, what are they doing with their waste stream?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right.
This is not just a U.S. issue. I was in China recently, and they're talking about the establishment of mega cities, which I thought they already had. Shanghai is 24 million, and they're looking at eventually it becoming 60 to 80 million people. And they're building apartment complexes and so forth that don't even have kitchens because a lot of the young Chinese young people eat out. They don't need a full-scale kitchen, so they're not willing to pay for the space associated with a full-scale kitchen.
We're doing that here. There's apartments I've seen that are small apartments. There's a bedroom and then little sitting area, and there's no kitchens. Yeah.
Right. What does that do to consumers, though, when they're not able to see the waste they produce or the waste that's produced, at a restaurant to get their meal on the table?
Yeah, but I would suggest there's probably less waste involved because now the waste is on the restaurant side where we're, again, focused on not wasting food, and it's not the consumer going out there and buying food. I mean, the worst thing for, a young person to go out there and, go shop because it's the cool thing to do, and they're hitting a farmer's market and they come home, put it on the refrigerator, and it just goes to waste.
Right.
And so I don't know. It's interesting. I think it's just the opposite. I think that because people are consuming food that's either eaten in restaurants or eaten on the run, there is less waste.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting concept about millennials that because of the social media, they're able to connect with each other, but not physically, be in the same place at the same time. But the one place where they are interested in being in the same place at the same time is at a restaurant. And that food is becoming sort of the the restaurant is like the community center, because that's where you meet up, and so I think that's why I think it's important for young people to be engaged in this food effort to try to reconnect us as a community, as a country, and I think food has a tremendous convening power to do that.
Yeah. Maybe we should start Instagramming our food waste.
Ooh.
Yeah, instead of Instagramming the nice plate, Instagram
what's
left of it.
What about 3D
2.0.
printing our food?
3D printing our food.
Yeah, 3D printing. I mean, that's happening too. And
Tasty, yeah.
Yeah, well.
It's an idea, though, right?
Well, it's not an idea. Actually, it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Right. I saw something about 3D printed pizza, which, that's something. But yeah, there's, there are also some other technologies I've seen out there that just kind of increase the awareness of food waste within the kitchen. Like I saw an article recently about IKEA's kitchen being able to reduce food waste just because the people who were working there were able to measure out how much was going into the trash every day, which I don't think they were even aware of.
Right. We have these public service announcements on the television. The Ad Council basically sponsors. One thing that could potentially be helpful would be for the Ad Council to get behind this issue. I mean, just as they did with litter. When I was a kid, boy, with the Native American at the river.
Yeah.
That was a
but
powerful.
I think they did a campaign with NRDC, the Ad Council, right?
Did they?
Yeah. Safe food. Yeah.
Well, to the extent that they could continue that, making us all more generally aware, and then giving us, very simple tips at a restaurant, about portion sizes, or to your point, when you go shopping, really just. Maybe you might want to shop more frequently and buy less stuff. Right. Be more thoughtful about it.
Right. Those media campaigns work. I mean, we often use that symbol of that commercial of the Native American with the tear in his eye and the garbage being thrown. And right after that, the government responded to that. They created the EPA soon after that. Yeah. Media campaigns work. But I think that again, we're kind of in our food waste bubble, talking to each other, and somehow we just got to get this message out there to more people. And no one wants to waste money. Nobody wants to waste food. And I think people, once they understand it, they'll come up with their own solutions at their own homes, and I think we can tackle this problem. But and we can't tackle climate change without dealing with some of these food issues, with the way we're producing food.
That's right. This is an effort that will require a lot of actors to get involved. So thank you both so much for your time. This was a great conversation.
Thanks. Thank you.